from Central Virginia. It is early August, and today is actually a cool and overcast day. We're expecting some rain in the afternoon. So this is a good day to work in the garden, and it's also a really good day to pick my Roma tomatoes. I've been picking them and canning them bit by bit, but I thought I would do a video today about sort of from picking to pressure canning tomatoes, just crushed tomatoes, no sauce or anything like that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go pick some Roma tomatoes. Come along with me. This is my sauce patch, and as you know, I've been worried about whether or not I would get the tomatoes to yield on this patch. Here's the deal. These plants on the bottom are really beaten up, and I think to some extent that's just the growth and life pattern of a determinate tomato. We also had somewhat of a problematic growing time this year. Earlier in the season, when I planted these tomatoes in May, it was way cooler than it usually is. And tomatoes do need some warmth, particularly at night. We had a very dry May and a very dry June, which also was problematic. We also had a cool June. So these tomatoes just really never kind of, they grew, but they grew, and they grew well, but they grew pretty slowly. I was comparing them to the previous year's performance on the Roma tomatoes. All right, so then in July, early July, it starts raining like crazy. Normally, we have a relatively dry July. It also got really, really hot. So all the warmth that we should have had in the early part of the summer, late spring, all the rain that we should have had in the early part of the summer and late spring didn't happen. But then in July, all of that happened. And so I think there was some disease probably coming in at that point. That's pretty tough conditions for tomatoes to grow in. Nonetheless, these tomatoes have persisted, and they have been yielding. And so as long as they're yielding and they taste good, I'm all good with that. Let's see what we got. These will just slip off when they're ready. Now notice that they're not red. That's all right. As long as they're ready to come off, I'm going to pick them. Determinate tomatoes yield their fruit over about maybe a 3-week time period. And so then they're done. The plants just say, I'm done. Now, so here's the deal. If you have a tomato that is truly, this one just fell off the vine, but notice how it is blushing. It's got the coloration in there. If a tomato is starting to blush like this, it will continue to ripen because it's got whatever it needs. It's got the chemical in there that will help it ripen up. So this one I'm just going to sit out on the shelf. It's not going to get canned today. The same with this one, and probably this one too. But the rest of these are okay for canning. Well, the timing is good here because the first drops of rain are starting to fall. So I am going to go inside and start canning and processing these tomatoes. The first thing I did was actually sort the tomatoes into ones that are ready to can and process. Those would be these. And back here is just a bowl of those that still can ripen a little bit more. I'll continue to pick these tomatoes every day and then add to them. And then when I have about this many, I'll go ahead and do a processing. My next step will be, I'm going to wash these tomatoes. I'm going to take the tops off, and I am not going to peel my tomatoes. This may be sacrilegious to some people, but I'm just going to crush these tomatoes up by putting them in the food processor, pulsing a few times, and that's it. I'm going to be using these tomatoes to make sauces later and in chilies and things like that. So I personally am not offended by having skin or seeds in my processed tomatoes. In fact, I think that's where a lot of the nutrients are, and so I really don't want to lose those things. All right, I'm just going to pulse these. I've cut my tomatoes in half, and I'm going to pulse them a few times just to chop them up. Now the processing begins. I have put all of my tomatoes crushed up in the food processor into a large pot, and I'm going to turn them up, and I'm just going to bring them up to a boil and let them boil for about 5 minutes. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 quarts of water into the bottom of the pressure canner. That's all you need. Every manufacturer probably has a difference, but for pressure canning in a Presto canner. It's 3 quarts for pressure canning. That's it. I'm going to turn the heat on the pressure canner, and I'm going to put the top loosely on and let that begin to heat up while these tomatoes are coming to a boil. On the back burner here, I have brought to a simmer the lids and the rings just to sterilize them. And they don't need to stay on a high boil. I'm just going to let them simmer away for a bit. While your tomatoes are coming to a boil, just every now and then give them a stir. The jars have been sitting in warm water, which I've now emptied out. The first thing I'm going to do is put lemon juice, this is 2 tablespoons for a quart, in both of the jars. I work with 2 jars at a time because that's what I can handle. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is fill the jars with the crushed tomatoes. These have been boiling for 5 minutes. And the reason you do that is it'll pull some of the air out and you'll get a more concentrated product, less air, less float. You fill the jar to 1 inch below the rim. And it's helpful to have something that you've pre-measured. I have a little spoon here that I have a mark on, and that is exactly where I want to be. So that is good. I'll move that one out of the way. Put this one here. Some people add salt or other spices to their tomatoes, but I use these tomatoes for all sorts of things. So I don't add any seasonings in at this time. I'll just wait to determine what I'm going to use them for, whether it's a soup or chili or something that's done in a Indian style or whatever I'm doing. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is wipe the rim down. I'm using the vinegar. Just going to wipe off the top of the rim quickly. Now I'm going to take my lid puller. I'm going to grab one of my lids, put it on the top. These have been in hot water because I do sterilize my lids. Again, they say it's not necessary for pressure canning, but I just do it as an extra thing. You put the lid on tight, on fingertip tight. You don't want to over tighten them or under tighten them. Okay, so those 2 are ready to go back into the canner. All right, I'm just going to carefully put these into the canner, lower them in. The canner has been heating up with some warm water as well. And again, that's not a necessary thing, but I just find it helps to accelerate the process along a little bit. I'm now going to put the top on the canner. And you'll notice there's a little arrow right here. And that's going to line up with an arrow that is right here on the Presto canner. I have lined it, I've put it down on here. It's sometimes a little tricky to get the right place. And then you have to use a little bit of muscle and you're going to slide, you're going to get resistance. You're going to slide this over like that. And you've locked this in place. And so I have put the heat on 8, which is not completely high, but it's medium high. Okay. This is what is called a dial gauge canner. And right now, this is the pressure, and the pressure is reading at 0. It's just begun to heat up. What's going to happen is this is going to heat up inside. You're starting to see a little spurts of steam and stuff coming out. That's natural. You shouldn't really see anything else coming from anywhere else. Maybe now and then a blurb from over here on the top. So you're going to wait and watch what's going to happen. You're going to see more and more steam, and eventually this little top is going to pop up. The vent is now up. It popped up. Now I'm setting my timer for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, I'm going to put the weight onto the steam valve. Okay, timer's going off. This is where the fun begins. Now you're going to start to build the pressure. You have to be real careful here. I've got the weighted top on here, and I'm going to carefully put that onto the steam vent. That's closing off the steam. So now the steam is not venting, so it's going to begin to build up the pressure inside the canner. And you're just going to start watching this gauge. When this gauge gets to 5, I'm going to back the heat down just a bit. then I'll do that incrementally as it gets up to 11. I want to slowly bring the pressure up to 11 and then hold it at 11 for 15 minutes. At this point, I don't leave the room. I pull up a chair, and this is when I catch up on the news and that sort of thing. All right, the pressure is now at 5 psi. And so I am actually going to go over and I'm going to turn my heat down to about from 8 to 6, so that's more to a medium. And I want the pressure to build very slowly. When it gets up to about 8 on the gauge, I'm going to back it down a little bit more. All right, here I am at 8 psi, so I'm going to go over here and just turn this down a little bit more, ever so slightly, to about a 5. Again, I don't want this thing to build pressure too fast. The key is go slow and steady. All right, the gauge has now hit 11, and I'm going to maintain it at 11 as best as I can. I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes, and I'm going to just watch this gauge really carefully. It's important that it stay at 11. If it drops below 11, you've got to reset the timer and start again. All right, the timer has gone off. I'm turning off the timer. All right, next thing you're going to do is just turn off the heat, and then you're going to walk away. Yep, you're going to walk away. You do not want to touch this thing. You're going to leave it until this lock goes down, and then it's safe to open the canner. You're not going to touch anything on here until this lock goes down. So I'm going to go take the dog for a walk. All right, this is now nice and cool. This lock has gone down, which means it's safe to take off, but things are still very hot. So you have to be careful. First, I'm going to take the weight off, and I'm going to carefully, this takes a little bit of muscle, not much. I'm going to carefully take this off. Now, here's an important thing. Make sure that you open the lid away from you so that you don't get steam and hot water dripping on you, because that is not a fun thing. I usually let it drip for just a minute. Then you can just set it aside. All right, take a peek in there. Those are our tomatoes. And what I'm going to do is just carefully lift them out with my jar puller. This is why the jar puller is important, because these things are still really hot. They're just not pressure. Lift it up carefully, and then I'm going to set it aside. Then I'm going to set it aside for 24 hours. So you're just going to let these sit for about 24 hours. They are extremely hot now. Eventually, you'll hear little pings as these jars will seal. You can see they're still boiling away in there. These are very hot. The final step comes the next day. You let the jars sit for 24 hours, and when they're done, you just unscrew the lid, and you're going to let them, and I take a little bit of that vinegar. I wipe the jars down because there has been some spillage out under the pressure. It pushed some product out, and this just will prevent, see there's a little bit on there. This just prevents any kind of, if anything wants to build up and on this, or anything like that. It just kind of cleans off the jar, keeps it tidy so that it'll store on your pantry shelf all nice. Thanks for hanging out with me today in my garden and my awful kitchen. But I hope that you will venture to try canning. I will perhaps do another video at some point on just how to can with a water bath canning, because I know most people don't have a pressure canner. But I will teach you how to do that too. Thanks for watching today. I hope your garden's growing well. Take care. Bye.